Hello and welcome to this research paper discussion session on Central Asia and the Great Powers after Afghanistan Withdrawal, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. I'm Soham, Director of Tillotoma Foundation. Today we shall discuss a recent paper of Dr. Stephen J. Blank, which has been published by Tillotoma Foundation. The new research paper is titled Central Asia and the Great Powers after Afghanistan. And it's a great pleasure for us to have this panel to discuss this newly released paper. We have with us, apart from Dr. Stephen J. Blank, eminent experts, Professor Elizabeth A. Wishnick, Professor of Political Science, Montclair State University, Dr. Nicola P. Contessi, Associate York Center for Asian Research. So welcome, all three of the panelists. I think we can begin this very interesting discussion on Central Asia and the Great Powers after Afghanistan withdrawal. So without further ado, let me request Dr. Blank to make some initial remarks.
Thank you, Soham. For the benefit of the audience, this paper came about as a result of an earlier program sponsored by the Tillotoma Foundation on May 16th on Central Asia. And they asked me to write this paper, and the paper is a result of my remarks and research, as well as the other panelists at that session. I believe that's also available on the Foundation's website. It focuses on the dynamics of Central Asia relationships among the major actors and the regional actors in Central Asia, particularly at a time of crisis, that is the likely fall of the government in Afghanistan. And I don't think we're out of line by saying that the government is likely to fall. The evidence is multiplying right before our eyes every day. And there is a real danger that the Taliban might come into power without having to make any kind of coalition. And it's unlikely that at the peace talks that are currently going on in Doha, that they are going to seriously negotiate because the wind is at their back. So what does this mean for Central Asia, and how does this affect what is already taking place in terms of Central Asian dynamics? First point I make here is that Central Asia is no longer merely an object of the great powers, even though for Russia and China, there is clearly evidence of a neo-imperial mentality that they want to have some sort of dominant or hegemonic role in Central Asia. The United States, its policy in Central Asia has collapsed because it was pivoted around Afghanistan. So if the paper makes the argument, therefore, that if the United States wants to get back into Central Asia in a significant way, it is going to have to do so primarily through economic and political means, not military means, even if by chance Central Asian states allow an American military base to monitor what's happening in Afghanistan. But as of yet, there is no discernible strategy from the Biden administration. And the Trump administration strategy, though I think was well thought out, didn't go very far. And if they're going to rely on that for the new strategy, then it needs a shot of adrenaline and some driving impetus, particularly in the economic and political spheres, that answers the real needs of Central Asian states. The other fact is the agency, if you like, to use a vogue word in political science theory, of Central Asian governments themselves. As I say, they're not just objects, they are subjects, particularly Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Indeed, I think you can notice a stratification between those two and the laggards, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, who are in much worse shape, much less able to carry out independent foreign policy and even develop a truly regional perspective and to truly be subjective actors in the full sense of the word. We see Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan launching initiatives at the regional level and in Afghanistan, and actually trying to bring Afghanistan into the region. Some of these initiatives are discussed in the paper. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, on the other hand, are much more vulnerable. Tajikistan is already vulnerable, as we see from the problems they are having with Afghan soldiers fleeing into Tajikistan and refugees coming. Kyrgyzstan, as we know, and Tajikistan had major skirmish earlier this year. Kyrgyzstan had a lot of chaos last year in the elections, and it is by no means truly a stable state, although there is a new government. And then on top of the efforts by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to advance both an individual and a regional perspective, and the individual machinations of, let's say, China, Russia, Pakistan, the United States, India to some degree, we also have the issue of the Russo-Chinese alliance. Now, I believe it's an alliance. Other scholars in the United States, and Elizabeth, who is a China expert, knows this very well, believe it is not an alliance. My view is a minority view, although I've published accounts of this. Nonetheless, everybody acknowledges that Sino-Russian relations are, according to both governments, at the highest level they've ever been. And many have predicted that there is going to be discord in Central Asia because China is clearly encroaching on not only on economics, because they surpassed Russia economically in Central Asia already a decade ago, but also militarily by bringing bases in Tajikistan and I think Afghanistan as well. The Chinese are clearly gradually enlarging their security perspective, and they are both clearly concerned about the likelihood of terrorism emanating out of Afghanistan, even though the Taliban keeps saying they're not going to let it happen. There's very little reason to believe that the Taliban can impose effective control. So all these factors, the withdrawal of the United States, the agency of Central Asian governments, the attempts by Russia and China individually and bilaterally to impose some sort of hegemonic order on Central Asia are going to be confronted by what I believe is the fact that the current Afghan government is going to fall sooner, I think, rather than later, just as the U.S. intelligence reports suggest. But I do not believe that the Taliban either can control the state or their associates. So there is a real danger of terrorism, drug trafficking, and extremism sponsored by groups associated with the Taliban or as part of it, and the likelihood of continuing civil strife, that is civil war, in Afghanistan. And all these trends are going to be major shaping trends for the next few years, for the foreseeable future, with regard to Afghanistan. These trends of civil strife and discord in Afghanistan, agency among Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in particular, and a struggle among multiple Asian powers for the most part, because Europe's day in Central Asia, I think, is over. And the United States is in search of a policy, so that we're going to see largely competition not only among Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan with regard to the other three Central Asian states, civil strife in Afghanistan, but also the involvement of India, Pakistan, China, Iran, Russia, and of course the 5 former republics of the Soviet Union in the affairs of Afghanistan. And this will make it a region of rivalry and contestation and a place of political strife, if not military, at least in Afghanistan. And it's likely not to end well, at least in Afghanistan. A few things have ended well there in the last 40 years. And as a result, I think it's going to be an area that is going to be increasingly important in world affairs, but it might be problematic, or might well be problematic. To use the Russian proverb, it's likely to be a suitcase without a handle. But it's a suitcase that a lot of other governments are going to try to lift up and have to deal with. So let me stop there and open the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think I thank you for also pointing out that, in fact, the initial version of this paper, which is titled, Central Asia and the Great Powers of Afghanistan, was first presented at the International Seminar on Central Asia, A Vision for Peace, Partnership and Development, which was organized by Tillotoma Foundation on 16th May 2021, as pointed out by Dr. Stephen Blank. And I think this paper is very timely and almost talks about all the involved actors. And we will hear more about this from Dr. Elizabeth Vishnik, I think, who would particularly elaborate on her perspectives to the arguments forwarded in the paper. Over to you, Dr. Vishnik. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, I thought I was an old-handed Zoom, but I forgot to unmute. So thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this important paper. There's so much rich detail in the paper that Steve didn't have a chance to discuss in his comments. So I'll bring up a couple of points that were in the paper that he didn't mention, and then raise some broader issues. So Steve began by talking about the Central Asian states and how we should view them as subjects and not objects. And this is a familiar pattern. Each new administration comes in and rediscovers Central Asia as if this region was not there for centuries. And so the Biden administration is no exception to that. And in the paper, Steve makes the point that the argument the Biden administration makes about the region is that we need to withdraw from Afghanistan so as to focus on the China challenge, when in fact the China challenge is present in this region. And so I think that's an excellent point, that I think there was a tendency from past administrations to view great power competition as somehow separate from regional politics. And I think we need to reintegrate the regional with the global competition. And I think the new Russian security strategy tries to make that point as well, looking at the regional aspects of these global competitive dynamics. And so I think that's an excellent point. But I would say that in addition to the U.S. developing a regional policy that encompasses Central Asia and as well as other powers like China, Russia, India, we need to engage with allies on this, because it's not just the U.S. that is neglecting Central Asia, but also the EU and other countries. And I think we need to work more with Japan and the EU and South Korea and India to develop a more comprehensive regional approach. And so another point that's interesting in this paper is Chinese influence in Central Asia. So Steve mentioned that China was enlarging its profile economically and in the security sphere. But there are real questions about what is the response in the region to this development. So on the level of governments, we see an effort to cooperate with China, but we see a different perspective, I think, in terms of what we can find out about public reactions. We've seen some public protests against various economic cooperation initiatives in various Central Asian countries, concerns about Chinese hiring or use of their own nationals as opposed to locals. We've seen some concern about resource issues, water issues, for example, in the region, China, Kazakhstan water issues, border concerns in terms of the fear of Chinese entities purchasing land or leasing land. And so there's some underlying questions. And one issue I've been following also is the COVID vaccine rollout in the region, and how despite hesitancy in the region about vaccines, there was an initial preference for Russian vaccines over Chinese, for example, showing some residual Russian soft power, at least in the scientific sphere. So I think that there's a complex picture about how China's growing footprint is being received in the region, and that I think that confirms Steve's point of these countries as actors in their own right, not passively accepting the role of having some kind of hegemonic order imposed by them, either by China or by Russia, or the two of them together. And so that's what I want to turn to in my final comment is how would Russia and China actually do that, assuming that that's what they want to do? And Steve and I disagree about whether or not there's a Sino-Russian alliance, but I do accept his point that the Sino-Russian partnership is the strongest it has been. But I see Central Asia as kind of a test case for the level of coordination and partnership. So will Russia really accept an expansion of Chinese basing in Central Asia? So far, they have this border troop presence in Tajikistan. But what if China brought in military forces or more extensively in the region to address any potential fallout from the likely fall of the government in Afghanistan? What if there were PLA boots on the ground? Would Russia be okay with that? Because the division of labor has always been Russia providing the security and China the economic. And even that was not always acceptable to Russia, considering it views this as a former sphere and tries to maintain it as such. So where would the coordination be? Would it be on anti-terrorism? How would any kind of joint order be imposed? Because if we look at the SCO has been relatively ineffective in dealing with Afghanistan. It's the only joint security organization the two are members of, Russia and China. And I wonder if at the end of the day, China and Russia might have preferred a U.S. continuing presence in Afghanistan, even though they both claim to object to it, because it was handy to have a foil in the U.S. to blame for the problems of Afghanistan and not have to do anything on their own to address the situation. So what might they be prepared to do, if anything, to address an unraveling government in Afghanistan? Is China really prepared to step in? China has so far been hosting dialogues, but I don't know if it has any experience or really ability to handle this situation instead of the United States. And would Russia really cooperate with China to manage the security environment? So these are some questions I have about this coordination that China and Russia might have. How would this work out? How does each country see the risks or the opportunities that this withdrawal of the U.S. presents for the region? So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you highlighted a number of important aspects, and your comments on the paper are most welcome. I think since there's a lot of talk about the agency that, of course, Dr. Blank mentions in the paper, the so-called agency of the Central Asian states, I wanted to ask our next speaker, Dr. Contessi, that how does he see the inter-regional cooperation in Central Asia, particularly whether it is inter-regional trade or other developmental cooperation? And as you know, they have to deal with these great powers and their own regional cooperation, their own regional coordination. How do you see that grow over the 3 decades that they have been independent? Please unmute yourself.
So thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with this distinguished panel and discuss timely topic of great powers in Central Asia after pullout. So my comments, as I mentioned, I unfortunately didn't have a chance to read the paper, but I did put together a couple of points, and my comments go significantly in the same direction as both preceding speakers. So I mean, I take the view that the pullout will certainly result in greater instability and fragility for Afghanistan, and greater weakness, and so depending, of course, on the outcome of the negotiations, whether it is a US-backed government or a Taliban majority government, or either way, there will be a situation of instability, and this is going to open up prairies of opportunities for great powers and regional powers to seek to influence the situation and to both stabilize, destabilize, or push their own agendas. And so, even though, therefore, spoilers are likely to emerge, whatever the situation that emerges, I think that the same situation also is providing incentives for regional powers to cooperate toward stabilization in one way or another. And so, in a sense, I see a trend towards greater regionalization because of and driven essentially by three factors. On one hand, a westward pull for China, a northward pull for China, for India, Pakistan, and Iran, and of course a southward pull for Central Asia and Russia. And in the latter respect, I think what we're going to have to watch is the new Uzbekistan, in particular, which has been rooting to position itself as the seam between Central and South Asia. So it is especially noteworthy the conference and connectivity that is taking place in Tashkent right now as we speak, essentially. And so I think these forces are likely to play out in three main areas of security and multilateralism and connectivity. So in a sense, starting with security, I think that essentially all of the regional powers, there is a strong concern, a strong sense of concern, but also a relief for the withdrawal. And even though none of them are likely to really replace NATO as a security guarantor, not likely nor willing to do so, I think, however, that all of the major relationships and fault lines that exist are likely to be strengthened. So in this sense, Russia and Central Asia will be compacted, and I think we're already starting to see this. And they will be compacted in a way around the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which it is worth reminding ourselves has also been conducting an annual operation called named Canal or Channel, to focus on drugs interdiction. So that is likely to be one tendency one driver of this regional cooperation. So in this sense, I think that the recent meeting that the CSTO held in Dushanbe, and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, of course, as the two southernmost members of the organization, and the ones which, in fact, border with Afghanistan, will be particularly at the center of attention. And so the meeting that was held of the organization, which was held in Dushanbe, is in a way, I think, symbolic. And also, but not only that, but it also resulted in a significant development, which was the agreement between Russia and Russia and Tajikistan to create a unified air defense system. And then the same trip by the foreign minister then continued to Uzbekistan, where the meetings resulted in a strategic partnership between Russia and Uzbekistan, which was the first of the kind in the military sphere between the two countries. And so that's about that as far as the Russian Central Asia is concerned, the CSTO. But also, I think we're seeing a new format, the Central Asia 5 plus Russia, which is a new informal format that also is starting to focus on Afghanistan. And Russia and China, that's another partnership that is being renewed and deepened. So with the extension of this mutual friendship agreement, which of course has been seen in large part as a response to and perhaps through the lens of the recent Russia-US summit, but I think there's also likely an Afghanistan component or perspective to that. China itself, similarly, is tightening up its linkages to Central Asian countries. So the C5+1 format that has was very recently, it very recently held a meeting just last May, and Afghanistan featured very highly on the agenda and was actually even the subject of a separate joint statement itself, and so that's another element. And then, of course, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, however ineffective it has been in recent years, and especially since the establishment of the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group, which dates back now more than a decade, maybe 15 years at this point. But they just, the organization just held a meeting as well in Dushanbe again, which is perhaps casual, but also perhaps symbolic again. And so that same meeting at the foreign minister's level was followed by an additional back-to-back meeting of the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group at, again, the ministerial level as well. So and I think I had a chance to very briefly look at take a look at that statement, which I came across just today, and I see basically the organization taking making a rather strong statement in terms of a very clear and urgent political statement surrounding the onset of fighting and the instability taking place. And so that, again, probably the SCO is likely to try, at least, perhaps in the intentions of China, to assume a more proactive stance, both in the region and in Afghanistan. And then, of course, there's the traditional China-Pakistan all-weather alliance, which we're probably going to see further strengthened. In that sense, I think perhaps the idea will be that Pakistan, I mean, China, boots on the ground, there are rumors, and I've seen reports in that sense, that at least informal, unofficial ones, that China already has a military and intelligence presence in Afghanistan. So perhaps that will be strengthened, but I think there might be also an expectation that Pakistan might take the role of some kind of a bodyguard for China's investments in Afghanistan. And then I will mention India because similarly to Russia and China, India has recently held a India plus C5 dialogue where Afghanistan and connectivity were both featured in the final statement and represented important issues. So and then of course there's connectivity. If I have a little more time to go into that, and I think there are three main points that to consider in this respect. Even of course knowing that connectivity requires stability, but at the same time, connectivity can be used as leverage to try and manipulate domestic political actors in Afghanistan towards a settlement, a political settlement. So perhaps that with that note, I think I would say I see three main tendencies here, of course. And on one hand, first is China. I think China is going to try and bring Afghanistan into the BRI framework and see China-Pakistan economic corridor as well. In this sense, there are now discussions underway for a Peshawar-Kabul motorway, which could then become a springboard for additional investments perhaps in infrastructure, perhaps, and also, however, an enabler possibly for natural resources extraction, and in this regard, I remind myself of the important assets that China has acquired in Afghanistan with regards to oil and copper mines. Second, India for its part has been focusing on pushing and bolstering the Chabahar Corridor initiative, which is, of course, the multimodal corridor between the ports of northern India, the Iranian port of Chabahar, and from there onward to Afghanistan. This initiative again featured at the latest India Central Asia dialogue, and secondly, I think that in this respect, Uzbekistan, which, as mentioned, borders Afghanistan, is certainly poised to emerge as India's focus partner. Not only is it becoming a transport hub in its own right, but also because of its potential in this north-south corridor, in extending that north-south corridor that the Chabahar initiative describes. So in 2019, Uzbekistan invited India to join, to participate in the construction of a new railway link between Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, which would then reach into Uzbekistan. Given the potential opportunities that exist there, India has also been backing the full admission of both Uzbekistan and Afghanistan into the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, to facilitate that linkage. And then lastly, Russia, Uzbekistan, Central Asia, more broadly, can be expected to work towards, both with China and with India, on transportation. And so, yeah, and I think that to an extent, this is good news, probably going back to that regional, like what this all means in regional terms. Certainly there is also the question of Central Asian subjectivity or agency. But I think there's also an emergent convergence of interests on the part of Central Asian countries and the great powers around the project of a greater Eurasia. And so I think that, in a sense, the withdrawal, the U.S. withdrawal, depending on the extent of that withdrawal, of course, but I think that is good news for the proponents of the Greater Eurasia project. So I guess I can leave it there, because I think I ran out of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Contessi. You gave a very detailed presentation highlighting connectivity and various other regional aspects, etc. Let me now request Dr. Stephen Blank to highlight in your paper. You talk about that the Biden administration can focus on creating and developing a genuine Central Asian strategy. Now, if you can make it, tell our viewers as to how do you view this sort of genuine, genuine Central Asian strategy from the United States perspective. Please unmute yourself.
Nobody should think that there is such a program of action yet. First of all, we have a series of declarations, for example, from the G7 and within the recent European Union-US summit about a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Blue Dot Network and so on. Japan and the U.S. signed similar agreement in 2018. But the real question is, regarding those particular initiatives, where's the money? We all know where the money is with regard to the Belt and Road Initiative, and there's lots of it. But and even though the Belt and Road Initiative appears to have been much less of a success than China claims, and there is now mounting evidence of problems and pushback there, there is no sign that the West collectively or the United States individually has a viable plan to provide investment for the kinds of programs Dr. Montez was talking about with connectivity. And the need is, of course, overwhelming. Second, there is no sign of a coordinated Western or, again, of an American policy rather than individual gestures with regard to providing the modalities of healthcare in regard to the current pandemic. I mean, you just don't do one-shot vaccine diplomacy. This has to be systematic, and there are other things that could be of vital importance: training doctors, helping to build hospitals, bringing in technology, and so on. So if there's to be a U.S. policy and strategy for Central Asia that makes sense, it has to be primarily political and economic, not military. It's very clear that Central Asian states are not likely to give the U.S. bases. Even if I think they wanted to, the opposition from the China and Russia is too strong, and the Taliban have threatened them as well. So if we're going to compete as a great power in Central Asia, and this builds on what Dr. Wishnick said as well, we have to understand that we're going to have to compete with China and Russia on the ground, and that we really have to bring something to bear, which in our case is superior economic and political capability. Moreover, we can leverage U.S., European Union, Japanese, South Korean, maybe Singaporean, and even Indian help in some ways. The necessities here mean that the U.S. has to start thinking strategically rather than tactically about Central Asia. It has to be able to see that Afghanistan is part of Central Asia and not something distinct from it, or the most important part of Central Asia, with the rest of Central Asia being an appendage to it. So it needs a greater regional awareness and a greater ability to rely on political and economic modalities and leverage them so that they get to Central Asia. The point is that if we are going to counter China, and that's what this administration is all about, and has said so, then you have to be able to counter China with something more than words and ideas. And in Central Asia, I mean, to be an honest assessment of Central Asia, is democratization is not anywhere on the cards there. Now, we can have liberalization, or we've seen something like that in Uzbekistan after Karimov, although it is by no means a democratic or liberal government. It might be possible in Kazakhstan also to bring about something along those lines. But your democratization is not the immediate issue on the agenda there, apart from the obviously immediate issue of the pandemic and providing where possible, means to deal with this immediate threat, there needs to be a vision and an implementation mechanism, both here in the United States and the U.S. government, to bring in private capital as well as what the U.S. government can do, and also to get capital from our allies, Japan, Europe, and so on. And what I see is simply talking about the immediate issues of Afghanistan, which is important, but by no means sufficient to any kind of coherent strategy.
Thank you so much. I think with that, I come to Dr. Wishnick, and I know there was a time when sort of China looked at Central Asia, for the reason of stability or sort of security purposes of the Xinjiang province. Now, as 3 decades have passed since the independence of these regions, what do you think is China's motivation in Central Asia, and how does China today, the Chinese administration, look at Central Asia?
That's a great question. I think that stability of Xinjiang continues to be a focus, and the development of Xinjiang as a hub for China's oil and gas industry is connected to that. And so pipelines connect Central Asia to China and have been very important in China's energy security quest as well. And I think that this Afghanistan, the changing situation in Afghanistan is going to create an additional conundrum. Because one of China's assumptions was that development in Xinjiang would reduce security threats to China, and that has proved counterproductive because the development has brought in an influx of Han people and exacerbated social tensions in Xinjiang, and China has resorted to extreme repression with the incarceration of 1 million Uyghurs, as well as some Central Asian ethnic nationals. And so it seems to me that the approach to Afghanistan is similar, that the idea is that incorporation of Afghanistan in the Belt and Road will ensure Afghanistan's stability. And I think that's going to be proven equally false. And I don't know if I agree with Dr. Contessi on Pakistan being the solution to the security problem for China. It hasn't worked so well for China in Pakistan in terms of the corridor that China has been trying to create there. And the limited private security that China has in Afghanistan also seems not up to the task. And as a result, China's economic investments have been relatively marginal in Afghanistan and not progressing. So I think China's quest for stability in this greater region is likely to remain elusive, and partly due to China's own counterproductive policies, which don't really take into account the security needs of the partner countries.
Right. Before I come to Dr. Contessi and take his comments, I would like to request Dr. Blank to take some of the questions that we have received. I think you have gone through the question. Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Go ahead. Please ask.
Okay, do you want me to read the question? Okay, sure. The question says, how do you see the United States changing its foreign policy with the Central Asia from the experiences in Afghanistan, and what would be the Biden administration's policy with regards to the increasing regionalism in the Central Asia?
Well, I think I answered that in my previous question, but the Trump administration, actually, if you read the Trump administration's documents on Central Asia, and I think it came out in 2019, and there were some other in 2018. They actually changed it to emphasize economic issues. However, Central Asia has never been a real priority in the United States, and not much was actually done with that. The real problem is that the Biden administration is now, as far as I can tell, dealing with the emergencies rather than with a strategy. The emergency is the impending fall of the government in Afghanistan and the fallout there that is millions of refugees, chaos, the very great degree of likely increase in terrorist threats, at least in the neighborhood. So it is not formulating a strategy as much as it is doing preventing fires, or trying to put out fires. Therefore, there is no real coherent policy as such. Now, that could emerge, but I don't think that we're going to know about this for some time or see it for some time to come. They are dealing with a whole range of issues. And I just think the capacity to think through Central Asia in strategic ways, the way that the capacity that people like ourselves have, because we don't have to deal with governmental responsibilities. So we can sit in our study and come up with a fabulous policy for Central Asia, which is great until it has to be road tested. But the administration is not likely, I fear, to come up with one. And that's a great problem. Because as Dr. Wishnick said, if your purpose is countering China, well, China has a major investment in Central Asia and always will. And it is obviously inimical to American interests and for that matter, American values. So therefore, if you want to counter China, what are you going to do about the Chinese policies in Central Asia, which are quite obvious and open, and we know what they are. And they also clearly are connected with, a genocide, which is, the most unspeakable horror you can imagine. So we have a real problem here, but I don't see that it's going to be dealt with effectively, at least during the balance of 2021.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll now come to Dr. Contessi and take his comments on this. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. So what is the question? Sorry.
The question is, how do you look at you can respond to Dr. Vishnik, of course, and with that, if you also focus on how the Central Asian countries, which I asked earlier also, but I'm just asking, how the Central Asian countries are sort of engaging with other Asian countries. So, we have all these other Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, India, and everybody else, being involved intricately. And as the sort of the economies of these Central Asian powers, the 5 Central Asian republics, they modernize and, get more integrated with the global economy. How do you think that sort of, works out in the sort of, because we are today discussing the post-Afghanistan withdrawal scenario,
right,
how that will play out?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that this latter trend has been going on for a while now, really. And so the transregional linkages between different parts of Asia or Asian subregions and Central Asia itself is an ongoing trend in pretty much all sectors of international intercourse, from trade to education to cultural cooperation to educational exchanges, specifically with countries such as South Korea, of course, Japan, Singapore, Southeast Asia more broadly. Also, there's a good extent of foreign assistance from Southeast Asian countries towards, for example, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, so the smaller regional countries. So yeah, so whether the pullout from Afghanistan in and of itself will strengthen this trend, I'm not entirely certain. I mean, it is an ongoing trend, and I think it is destined to grow regardless, in a way, also as a result of perhaps the there's also another factor to consider in this respect, which is the consolidation I mean, not without obstacles, of course, but the consolidation of the Eurasian Economic Union, which provides external players, external countries, with a more or less common market and common economic area, and so and at the same time, as a semi-independent actor, that is the Eurasian Economic Commission, looking to expand its economic relations, and so conducting its own brand of economic diplomacy, for instance, with these other countries, with a view to reaching free trade agreements. And so other than, for instance, with India, which is under negotiation, there are a number of such trade agreements. For example, with Iran, Singapore is either on the way or it recently came online. So there's a number of and so this the Eurasian Economic Union provides for an additional boost to this multi-directional outreach from, I mean, of course, with a limited, probably limited to Kazakhstan. You know, not all of the Central Asian countries are members, but so yeah. Yeah, so no, I think Dr. Wishnick is probably correct. Actually, she's definitely correct. That the Afghanistan can expose, or has already exposed, the contradictions perhaps inherent in this China-Pakistan relationship, or all-weather alliance, what have you. In this sense, probably what I would say is that the withdrawal is perhaps, I mean, the thorn in the side that a more unstable, more fragilized Afghanistan represents for China is probably the greatest strategic dividend for the United States in this sense, and also because not only in its own right, but also in the sense that of heightening the possible contradictions in that China-Pakistan relationship. Now, that China may want to see Pakistan doing the heavy lifting of the security provision there, that I think remains. But of course, then the two also have different interests and different positions and priorities, probably with regards to Afghanistan.
Thank you so much. I think we have discussed the issue of the US. We have discussed the issue of China. I think I can request Dr. Blank to talk a bit about the issue of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, because he talks about it in the paper. So how does he look at this withdrawal, and in the historical context or in the present geopolitical context as well? Some people are of course comparing with Vietnam. So how does this work out? And Dr. Blank has also mentioned about the Soviet withdrawal during the late 80s. So if you talk about that a bit. Please unmute yourself.
I remember the withdrawal from Vietnam because I was in graduate school at the time. There are certain similarities. Again, it's another lost war. I think the differences are in the political and strategic sphere. When we pulled out of Vietnam, when we withdrew from Vietnam, there was an immediate chaos and an immediate Soviet effort to push forward in the third world. At that time, it was primarily Africa in 1975-76. And also later on in Afghanistan. But Vietnam itself became a stable state. I do not see the Taliban as being able to govern Afghanistan. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I see the likely result of the withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan as civil war. And what's more, as I mentioned in the paper, many other governments do as well, particularly their intelligence agencies. They are already trying to recruit proxies. And I think that this is not a misplaced assessment, because nothing I've seen on the part of the Taliban tells me that they can govern the country in a legitimate way. And what's more, that the socio and economic changes that have taken place in Afghanistan since the Taliban were kicked out in 2001 are immense. And I don't think that they're able to deal with those, and or with the ethnic and tribal tensions that victory will unleash. And furthermore, because of the likely vacuum, all the other Asian states will get in. Now, what is significant here is that I don't see much or any role for Europe or the United States. I think the West's day, as I say it in the paper, in trying to fashion an Afghan state, or find Afghanis who are willing to build the state along Western lines, is over, at least for now. And therefore, the results of this are going to be very different than Vietnam, because the defeat in Vietnam led to the creation of a pretty strong and stable state. Whereas in Afghanistan, I think it's just going to lead to another cycle of civil war that will tempt all the neighbors who believe they have important, if not vital, interests there to get involved. So that's my answer to the question. I mean, there are similarities in the military field. I mean, it's very clear that the United States, despite all this experience, has still not learned how to wage these kinds of wars. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And I mean, I worked for 27 years in the U.S. military, so I know this, but firsthand, we have not learned or profited by the Soviet failure in Afghanistan or our own previous failures in Vietnam. And that's very unfortunate, but that's not going to affect Central Asia. So what I fear is that there's going to be more violence. Certainly, nobody's putting enough pressure on China to stop the genocide in Xinjiang. There's likely to be Afghan civil war. Indo-Pakistani tensions are not being addressed, as we know. Iran, which is an aggressive player, is going to get involved in Afghanistan. It is already involved with China and Russia in myriad ventures as well. And I just don't see Afghanistan becoming a stable, coherent state. And the ramifications of that are going to be significant, certainly regionally, if not globally. So it's going to be very different than Vietnam.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think, Dr. Wishnick, there is another question. I hope you have had the chance to look at it. I can read it out to you. It basically talks about the conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and the other. We can give several other examples as well of the regional conflict relating to various issues. I can think of water as an issue. I can think of several other aspects. So how do you look at it as going into for the regional sort of amalgamation or the increased regionalism? How is it as a struggle for increased regionalism for the rise of Central Asia as an independent unit?
That's an interesting question. I think Dr. Blank addresses that in his paper to some degree in terms of he looks at the differences between the larger, more economically stable states like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan compared to the poorer states Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So you have economic divisions. You also have difference. Some states are energy producers like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, oil and gas producers. Others have more water resources. So there are a variety of different factors that create natural divisions in the region, and different political trajectories to some degree. So I don't really see some greater Central Asia emerging in this powder keg as Afghanistan implodes. I think Dr. Contessi mentioned the regional initiatives that bring the states together with the various outside powers. I think we might see greater regional dialogue, but these are still relatively young states. They're still trying to stake out their own independent paths, and I don't see some kind of greater Central Asia emerging. And I think that's a challenge for these greater Eurasia projects because they kind of assume more unity of action in this part of the world than may actually exist.
Right. Thank you so much. I think we can have just some short concluding remarks, and then I think we can conclude this discussion. So I request, I think we can start with Dr. Contessi, if you can make your remarks. Please unmute yourself.
Yep. So I would say probably by way of concluding thoughts that so I mean the withdrawal, I mean, so this is basically in a sense the type of power vacuum. This is essentially what I think is that the real new great game that we've been hearing about for now since the early mid-90s, I think now it begins for real. And so in the sense the withdrawal from Afghanistan may perhaps go down as the official beginning of a multipolar era, if I can venture a bold prediction there. It might be perhaps too bold, I might regret it, but nonetheless. And so we're going, and in a way we're already seeing this. We're seeing everyone speaking with everyone, great powers, smaller powers, regional states, outside states. We're seeing great powers essentially engaging in issue linkage on a vast global scale and transsectoral scale. For instance, the discussions between Russia and the United States, and then on Afghanistan that have been taking place, and also the discussions on and China Russia cooperation. So I think it's a big chessboard for sure, and and um, and so this is going to essentially redraw probably the way that we analyze politics, that we're used to, and the ways and the language of international relations that we've been used to. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think I think I'll request Dr. Wishnick. I want to take your concluding remarks, but also want to ask you that how do you see the SCO, in the near future, particularly in the context of Afghanistan? Also, that SCO is a forum mainly started by the Chinese, and so how do you look at it?
The SCO came out of an initiative to achieve greater border security, and it did manage to do that to some extent. But I don't really see this organization being that effective in the current circumstance, apart from providing a mechanism for intelligence sharing, perhaps about terrorist threats. But certainly, I don't see it playing a leading role in dealing with the Afghanistan situation. But I think that apart from the great power competition elements that we've discussed, I think we also need to focus more on the regional context. We haven't talked much about the Sino-Indian border tensions. I think India has been a more important player in Afghanistan than China economically so far, and that it's in a time when China and India have a high level of tension. I think that's going to be an obstacle to creating some kind of lasting solution for a stable Afghanistan. And then, as Dr. Blank mentioned, we are in a global pandemic that is now affecting Asia very severely, and that is also creating more challenges for already economically weak states in the region. And so the U.S. policy, I agree, would need to factor in some kind of public health initiative. And I think perceptions of this pandemic really do shape regional views of the various countries. So it's not just a matter of chessboards. I think there are some global forces that are beyond the controls of states, like this pandemic, that are affecting the ground on which these states are competing.
Thank you so much. I request Dr. Stephen Blank, you mentioned in your paper about the Russian hedging policy in one aspect, and also since we have not specifically discussed about the Russian policy also in our second part of the discussion. So if you can highlight a bit on that and also give your concluding remarks.
Yes. First of all, Russia is using this opportunity to achieve certain goals. One, it wants to have a voice in what happens and leverage in Afghanistan after this is all over, regardless of who wins. So it is making deals with both sides. It has been running guns and giving intelligence to the Taliban for 8 years now, but it has also been engaging the Afghan government. The Afghan government actually came to Russia and wanted to buy Russian weapons, and they weren't shown the door. Moscow is playing with everybody. Moscow really does not care who runs Afghanistan, as long as A, they don't export terrorism to the Central Asia or to Russia. B, they don't export narcotics We have not, and the literature doesn't talk enough about that, because it creates an enormous public health issue and crime issue in Russia, like everywhere else. And three, that they don't export religious extremism or violence. That said, it doesn't matter that if it's the Taliban or Ghani. As a matter of fact, the Russian government people have said that the Taliban has said they're not going to export terrorism, and they have told the Russians this and so on. I don't believe it for a moment, and I don't believe they have enough control over independent associations of terrorists and extremists affiliated with them, or will have enough control over Afghanistan. But the Russians' point is that this has to be an opportunity for them to reassert their attempts to be a security manager, or if you use the German term, Ordnungsmacht, power that makes order in Central Asia. And second, that they're concerned about insulating the area from terrorism, narcotics, and religious extremism. So they are, they are talking to everybody. I use the phrase, they are hunting with the hounds and running with the hares in the paper, because this is the way the Russians do conflict resolution. They get on both sides of the equation and then try to manipulate it for themselves. Indeed, in Afghanistan that is consumed by civil war, as long as that doesn't go outside the boundaries of Afghanistan, is not the worst solution for Moscow.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Blank. I think all the viewers, the new paper titled Central Asia and the Great Powers After Afghanistan is available on the website of Tillotoma Foundation, tillotomafoundation.org, in the section of papers. This paper is written by Dr. Stephen Blank, Distinguished Fellow Eurasia, Tillotoma Foundation. And I thank the two panelists, apart from Dr. Blank, Dr. Nicola P. Contessi and Dr. Elizabeth Wishnick, for joining us in this very interesting discussion on this new paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.